Broccolis with Hats. Part 4. Hands are a privilege, not a right. By Cheerios. Read by My Lost and Found. Summary. Midoriya huffed, crossing his arms and turning away from them to kick at the villain hand pile. Do you know what it feels like to be Midoriya right now? It hurts. He paused, consideringly. Not as much as the villains, but it hurts. It wasn't that Ida and Todoroki were nervous to tell Midoriya that Bakugo had been kidnapped. No, of course not. Shortly after Midoriya had subdued the villains, not that the teachers knew it was him, Ida thought faintly, because of course not. Of fucking course Midoriya was gonna get away with another dozen murders. Reality warped around his strange friend. He'd been knocked out after tripping over a tree root. Because only Midoriya would manage to kill several high-profile villains and then get taken out by an overgrown foliage. After Todoroki finished fussing over Midoriya, blushing profusely when he realized he'd get to carry Midoriya, then huffing over his aching arms because Midoriya wasn't lightweight, they'd returned to the main building just in time to witness their poor sensei in the midst of a mental breakdown as he and the other heroes tried to figure out, well, everything that had just happened. Unbeknownst to the two, earlier when the kidnapping had occurred, Shigaraki, in a moment of childish anger over the lack of villains, had flipped every middle finger on his decapitated hands upward before dragging an unconscious Bakugo through the portal. No one can say exactly how Bakugo had been incapacitated, but they'd ask when they retrieved him. Ida was nervous. A normal occurrence for him, sure, but still. Todoroki tapered off at the end of his half-explained story of what had happened while Midoriya was out. And Midoriya? Ida expected tears, primarily because a few of the other classmates were still milling around the hospital hallways, and Midoriya never revealed his true nature in front of them. Ida didn't know why he couldn't have picked someone else. He didn't expect a perfectly composed smile sitting on their friend's face. It wasn't anything like the grins they were used to, nor the odd curling of lips when he proposed a particularly crazy plan. The smile was controlled and blank. Ida felt justified in the shaking of his hands when Todoroki himself leaned back a few inches. "Midoriya?" Ida ventured. "You've done something, haven't you?" It wasn't a question. "Whatever do you mean?" It wasn't an answer. Todoroki pressed his lips together briefly. "You've usually done something, Midoriya. We're in a hospital, no one's dead, and you've just found out Bakugo was taken." Ida sighed, regretting about asking, but knowing he had to. "So, what did you do?" Midoriya gasped, exaggerating his features. "You mistake me for some sort of scoundrel." His hand gripped the fabric over his heart in faux shock. "Midoriya, I am a respected student of UA. To even insinuate—" Ida groaned. "Midoriya!" Todoroki aimed a sharp glare his way, having been nodding along, agreeing that Midoriya was in the right. "Be nice," Todoroki hissed venomously, before turning to aim a small grin at Midoriya, who returned it with a beaming smile of his own. Todoroki's ears reddened at the tips. Ida blinked heavily, sighing. "Okay, Midoriya, what have you done today? In the hospital, with hundreds of witnesses?" Midoriya brightened. Ida most definitely caught Todoroki's bespotted surprise. Well, let's see. I talked with the nurses." "Uh-huh." Todoroki nodded, following along perfectly, as though there'd be a test later. "I had a checkup," he added after a moment. Ida pinched the bridge of his nose. "And?" Well, I got my casts on. He leaned his head towards them to point them out on his arms. Sure. Kaminari and I returned each other's toothbrushes. What? Todoroki snapped to attention from where he let his head rest on his hands. Midoriya waved his hand. We accidentally grabbed each other's plastic bags when we were packing up. Ida nodded. What else? And, my mom dropped by to see how I was doing. Midoriya finished. I believe that's it. Todoroki shot a look towards Ida, somehow conveying, I told you so, in a single, slow blink. Ida rolled his eyes, a childish act he likely wouldn't have dreamed of before becoming an unlikely, and unfortunate, friend with Todoroki and his surprisingly petty behavior. All right then, if you're sure that's it. But it wasn't. Ida prayed for the day when it was, but it was never it when it came to Midoriya. Todoroki jumped in his seat, leaning back with wide eyes. Oh, Midoriya intoned slowly, eyeing the crack in space-time with mild interest. Midoriya, what is that? Midoriya whistled lowly, inspecting it for a moment before pausing sheepishly. I may have forgot to mention one of my activities. Midoriya! Ida downright scandalized, which Midoriya thought was an unfair overreaction. I apologize, he said instead. That was wrong of me. Todoroki blinked heavily at the portal-like opening in the wall of the room, then at the door that no one seemed to be looking through. Could you explain, Midoriya? He asked politely. From here, it looks like a weather balloon. Midoriya squinted. Ida squeezed his eyes shut, praying for patience. I am not in the mood for this. I think it's just some sort of lens flare, and some dust. He responded reassuringly, after seeing how put out Ida seemed. Just tell me, Midoriya. Todoroki side-eyed Ida warily, curling a protective arm around the bed rails of Midoriya's hospital bed. Sure, this was a bit odd, but so was everything Midoriya did, so it didn't deserve a snappish tone. Fine. Midoriya pouted. I may have created a crack in space-time through which to collect millions of villain hands. Obviously, I didn't get the right ones, though. He angrily towed one of the hands that had fallen through the portal, which now they just noticed. Ida paused in his misery, glancing at the freshly amputated hands. Huh. What do you mean, huh? Todoroki pursed his lips momentarily, also taking a cursory glance at the hands. Well, it's not exactly the weirdest thing you've done, Midoriya. Ida's face scrunched a bit for a second. I hate to say it, but honestly, I think I was expecting worse. Midoriya's face pinched a little. What do you mean, worse? This is totally fudged. He waved his arms towards the crack with a dramatic flair. I know, but after the last time with the nuke and the masks and the kidnapping... Oh, come on! Midoriya urged towards the portal-like thing again, gesturing wildly. How did I even do this? Todoroki ventured, not unkindly. I don't think either of us understand why or how you do things, Midoriya. Midoriya huffed, crossing his arms and turning away from them to kick at the villain hand pile. Todoroki looked downright devastated. Do you know what it feels like to be Midoriya right now? It hurts. He paused consideringly. Not as much as the villains, but it hurts. Todoroki, though not obvious to anyone onlooking, had the saddest expression on his face. Ida, in a moment of kindness, made to apologize, before noticing something. Midoriya, why are the hands all holding All Might figurines? Well, haters gotta pay. And that payment is All Might merch. Ah, yes, the baby hand portal. One of my favorite Llamas with Hats events. Whitey's gotta pay, and that payment is baby hands. Or in this instance, haters gotta pay, and that payment is All Might merch. That boy will do anything for All Might merch. And in the end, he got the greatest All Might merch. His quirk.